I probably ought to have this over here, right? And the chat is full of, I can't hear you. How's that? Is that better? Sorry, guys. I was all excited because I was playing with my lighting today. Let me take that from the top. This 5-watt live is brought to you with the support of TrueFire. Man, that's classic. More about TrueFire later on. I've long been fascinated with why we collect things. Where does this instinct come from? Where does it take us? I follow a number of channels where folks talk about collecting things. And one of my favorite channels is Teddy Baldessar, who runs a channel and a business dedicated to watch collecting. About a year ago, Teddy made a video on this subject about watches, where he talked about sort of things he's observed over time. And I've always kind of held it in reserve as an outline for a video I wanted to try to write, because I'm amazed at how well the conversation about collecting one thing generally applies to collecting anything, as you guys are always quick to point out. All right, Bebe is here. You can hear me say so. Boom, there he is. As I was saying, that music in the intro is a snippet of the piece that John Cordy worked up for the top SG players video I'm working on. I've got the script done. I'm going to do a final edit, and then I'm going to record that. He's playing a 1968 SG special that he got borrowed from a guy up the road. He made a video about it, so check that out. If you heard any resemblance to a certain windmilling SG special player from the 70s, it's purely coincidental, I can assure you. I know because I ran it through the AI to make sure that it wouldn't trip the copyright flag. I played it for David Barber earlier today, and he said it sounds like The Edge sitting in with The Who. I don't know why it would sound like that. If you behave yourselves, I'll play the whole clip of John playing the 2 minutes piece that he did for me. I'll give it to you at the end. How's that? As I said, I'm working on the script for the top 10 SG players that changed the world of music. So that'll be up next week. See the description on from my online store for t-shirts, hoodies, etc. Also, the link for Patreon is there. So if you want to become a friend of 5-watt, you can do that there. If you wanted to get one of the 5-watt World Barber buses, the Barber Electronics overdrive bus, which is it's interesting. David and I are going to do a live stream where we talk about the difference between the sounds that are created on the original Beano album by a Bluesbreaker amplifier, which is what David's trying to emulate. We're trying to emulate with that pedal, versus the Bluesbreaker pedal that is also so famous and has spawned a bunch of other circuits, like King Tone and a whole bunch of others. So we're going to do a video about that. We're going to do a live stream about that coming up. But we've got buses back in stock, so you can go there and check those out. Links in the description. Remember, if you have a question or a comment, put a question mark and a space so that I see it pop up in the chat. I do drag my script across the chat because you guys are way too interesting for me to be able to ignore routinely. These questions just jump up. I like that everybody's trying to figure out a good way to describe collecting in a very positive light. I'm actually here to do the same thing. I just think it's interesting that we're going to talk about that. So let me put this up. Maybe this. No. How about this? There we go. That's pretty good. I wanted to give you guys a look at the slide without the text on it. These are just the guitars that were in the living room right now. I clipped just a square out of it, and somebody commented on Instagram that when I posted it there that there was a lot of PRS. in the picture? I guess there are. There's a PRS SE Silver Sky, and then the two Miras that I own that I purchased to put Ron Ellis pickups in. Anyway, so just so you get a look at those. At the end of the day, playing and collecting guitars should be fun. I don't want to start throwing. When you start throwing hundreds of thousands of dollars at your collection, I think it's good to spend some time thinking about the parameters, to spend some time thinking about what your goals are for the collection. So I'm going to go through 6 things to consider when you're building your guitar collection. Just food for thought. I don't think we need the same rules around collecting, because there's a certain emotional component to buying guitars. These are beautiful things after all. But I wanted to share some things that I've learned in my own collecting journey, and it's actually having talked to hundreds of people here in 5-Watt World since starting the channel 5 years ago about their collecting journeys and things that they learned. Let me get my smiling little gnome face off the screen again there. Okay, so number one is develop your taste over time and develop a theme. So when you get into something, I think it's really common to dive in and start buying things all over the place. Your enthusiasm for having guitars kind of runs away with you. Buying and playing, figuring out what it is you like, helps develop your tastes. There's no question having your hands on more guitars over time is going to teach you more about what you like and don't like. I said a couple of weeks ago on the live stream that I wish I was as cool as my friend Zach Childs, and really was just about Telecasters. But of course, in hindsight, and in relation to the script, Zach kind of collects Telecasters. He's kind of one of the guys that I'm going to mention here, where there's different types of collectors. I'm coming to that. I've dove into new types of guitars, bought a few of them that I hadn't really spent much time with at first, only to figure out that I might have been better off going in a different direction, with a different purchase, with the next purchase. Some people dive in and making it sort of a numbers game. They're like, I want to have a 5 guitar collection. So they go in and they get caught up in checking the boxes, rather than trying to find the guitars that fit them the best, that are to their taste or the kinds of sounds they're chasing. What they do is they think they've been told by the marketing reps that we need one of everything. This is my version of that. That's a picture from in here earlier today. And yes, if Jeff Mackerlane's here, I do know that that's not a Stratocaster. Jeff is always quick to remind me that's not a Stratocaster in the middle there. But this is like, a 3 guitar collection. This is a 335. This is a fully hollow guitar, a Les Paul style guitar with P90s, and a Strat style guitar. So I was kind of, having these 3 guitars is sort of me checking the boxes. I will say that I'm not really a Strat guy either. So if it wasn't for the channel and a project that I'm doing around a thing I'm going to call the perfect 2 guitar collection or the perfect 3 guitar collection, I probably wouldn't have that PRS, although I got a great deal on it from the good people at Ish. So let me take this back off. So going along with exploring your taste in instruments, I encourage everybody to try to develop a theme. Some folks, they go in and they want to have one of each brand, or maybe they'll want to have one type, like I just showed, of everything. Certainly something, like I said, that I've been guilty of doing myself, going down the rabbit hole, exploring one brand's offerings kind of across the board. I did that with Strandberg when I first discovered them. It was just this amazing moment for me. And I think I had 3, and of those guitars, I own 1 of the original 3. I do own actually 3 Strandbergs right now, but one of those is for a project. And anyway, I don't have to, I grew up Catholic, but I'm not doing confession here. I'm just saying that it's easy to get pulled into doing a single brand or a single type of guitar and then kind of go down that rabbit hole. This is important because, as much as music should be done in a community, we most often actually do this buying in isolation. We sit at our computers or on our phones and we spend a lot of time looking. And it's interesting how easy it is for me. A lot of this is, as I've said here many times, a lot of this is me working through this stuff. It's so easy to think, well, everybody needs to have one of these, whatever these are. Everybody needs one of these. Not true. Anyway. Number 2 is recognizing that your tastes are going to change over time. I've mentioned this before. There's a great book. I think this actually is available. For a long time, it was only available as a Kindle. book. And I think it's now, yeah, see, I can see the text on the screen here and I'm immediately distracted. Patrick Rohn wrote a book called Enough. And he actually wrote this as an exercise on an iPad to kind of wrestle with what was enough. In that book, Rohn says, I should leave it there while I quote the guy. In that book, Patrick says that our definition of enough, like any important question in our lives, will change over time. He also says that we can only know what enough is by having too much and having had too much and having had too little. But by having been there, then we'll get a better sense of what is enough for us. And then he goes on to say that like any important definition in our lives, that definition will likely change over time. And I think that's really a profound thing to realize about our guitar collections, because people often say to me, I bought all these guitars when I was first starting out, and I don't need all these, and I don't even play this whole batch of guitars anymore, but I haven't found time to get rid of them yet. And I've moved on to something else. I'll use myself. I'm going to use myself as an example. As I've said here before, probably in the late 80s, I went down a rabbit hole on trying to play straight ahead jazz. I took guitar lessons with Rick Beato in 1989 for 2 years. And I was playing actually a Steinberger copy because it was an easy travel guitar for me at the time. What Rick used to affectionately refer to my Hohner as the cheeseburger, because it was not a Steinberger. And then in the late 90s, I actually decided to put together a trio and then later a quartet. And this is the poster from the first version of the Miles Ahead group. We later kind of made it a single word. And these are the guys that were in the band, guys and gal that were in the band: Donna Wood on saxophones and flute, and Darnay Campbell on bass, and Brian Friedman. Darnay and Brian were easily the best jazz musicians to have come through Binghamton when I worked there. And you can see, just barely, you can see that I've got a fat Fender Diaquisto, black, piano black, beautiful guitar with ebony all over it. But on that gig, it fed back. I mean, we're in a corner in a restaurant. It was a time of flat wounds and big guitars. And when I was sitting in my living room, that worked great. But when I actually got out and started gigging, I realized that it wasn't the easiest thing to play that kind of music on. And I wasn't the best guy in the band. I was probably the weakest guy in the band. I actually switched to playing this. And you guys might have seen this picture before. I switched to playing a Parker Fly that I bought at the time. And I put flats on it, flat wound 10s, Diodari Chromes 10s. Of course, they were still on it when I sold the guitar, because flats never go bad. And I played that gig that way for the next 4 years. If you fast, and that was an amazing rig for me into a Hot Rod Deluxe. It's just what I used at the time. And if you fast forward to today, I'm spending my time studying Eric Johnson's chord shapes. I'm working on my legato playing, and I've left the 12 gauge flats behind for a set of 8s on a simple PRS Mira guitar. You guys know that last year I sold 11 guitars that were part of that previous part of my playing journey, and I moved into a smaller and better collection of guitars that I now play every day. The point is here that, when your tastes change, try to be in a position to shift, to pivot. Try to have bought the instruments at a price you can get back, or at least be okay with seeing a small loss. This is how I think of it. If I bought a guitar at $800 and then 2 years later I have to sell the guitar for $600, I kind of think of it as a rental on the time that I had the guitar to use and learn from. It takes the sting for me a little bit out of taking a small loss. And touching on that, I discourage you from thinking that guitars are a good thing to buy to increase in value. If you look at over time, we're lucky if the value keeps pace with inflation. The only guitars that have seen wild increases in values were those that were played in the 50s and 60s by our heroes. If it's not for an association with a famous player, I defy people to show me a guitar that's worth much more than the straight rate of inflation. So if an ES335 was worth $335 in 1958, it's probably people like Clapton that played the 335 that make it worth more than the inflation rate change between 1958 and now. There's a lot of guitars that really, if you just look at it, they were $300 to start, they're $3,000 now. and that's almost direct, 1950s money to current money. So really think about that. And if you're thinking about guitars as an investment, I'll tell you, there's a lot better places to put your money to know that you're going to be okay in the long run and make a decent return. And, who knows, that might keep you being able to buy guitars into your retirement. That's my theory, at least. Like I said, if guitars hold their value, it's because they're the biggest brand names as well. I really love smaller companies, but you need to come to grips with the fact that often smaller companies just aren't in as high a demand. So unless you're buying used and at good rates, you want to be very conscious of the fact that you're buying into these because you love them. I would say that the ultimate example of that is a custom guitar, or a custom anything. I've had custom guns made. I've had custom guitars made. I own all the custom guitars made I've ever had made, not many of them. I put together some parts casters of my own that have long gone, but you need to realize that you're in for the long haul. You're never going to see the money back on a custom instrument or on customizations that you do to anything. You're just probably never going to see that come back either. Oh, I've totally forgot. The channel actually is, I feel like this is a bit of an ego metric, and I'll just own that stuff right up front. The channel is at 249,944 subscribers right now. And I've been doing this for 5 years. And I don't know how many of you are watching that if you haven't subscribed yet, if you could go ahead and hit the subscribe button, it doesn't cost you anything, and it supports us, supports me. It'd be lovely if we can push that over the top in this next hour, and it'd be a lot of fun if we could do that. It'd be a lot of fun for me. Like I said, it's an ego metric. I totally accept that. Accept, maybe both. Anyway. All right. Yeah, you guys are all helping each other. That's great. Our responses are wonderful to kind of what I'm rolling through here. I'm already at number 3. I don't know if we have an hour's worth of me ranting about this or rambling. I'm not sure which I'm doing here. Number 3. And I saw Lyle from Psionic Audio is here. It's great. He definitely could speak to this. Number 3 is cost of ownership. I've been bit by this many times. We look at the price tag of a guitar and we think that's the cost of having the guitar, when in fact, to keep a guitar running, even an excellently built guitar, has costs associated with it. For this reason, most of the people that I know that own a number of guitars, a larger number of guitars, they usually get pretty good at setting up a guitar. Jeff McErlane is really good at setting up a Strat, which is a real art form. And it's not something I attempt to do. I'm not a Strat guy. I've never really spent a lot of time doing it. I've never been able to balance the tremolo and all the kinds of things that you have to do when you change string gauges and that kind of stuff. And Jeff has learned that. He also has had to learn it because he's out on the road and he's far from somebody that he can trust to work on his guitar. My local guitar shop, Ish Guitars, the technicians there are amazing, which is an excellent place. They still they charge about $100 for a full setup for a guitar these days. And that's expensive when you start multiplying it across the humidity changes of the year that we have in upstate New York and the number of guitars that are even here. And I'm going to touch on how many guitars are here. I heard David Grissom say years ago in an interview, not this interview, this was the first time he was on the channel. Jeff helped arrange to have David Grissom on, and it was a great conversation about guitars or amps. And I won't go into it. Go back and look at it if you want to. It was a lot of fun. But I heard David Grissom say in another interview, there are times when it feels like his collection owns him. And he was talking about this maintenance issue, that he would go open a vintage Gretsch case and the plastics in the pick guard would have degassed and changed the color of the finish or something because he hadn't been in that case in a year or something. And he actually went on to say that it sounds so 5-watt world, and you can see why I would remember it. He went on to say that he actually dreams of a situation where he has just 1 or 2 electrics and a couple of acoustics, and that's what he uses to make everything. That's not what he has. He has a bunch of guitars down there in Texas, and I know he loves guitars because we've had him on talking about his new model, his SE, and the sort of the ongoing process. And like when we had him on talking about the SE, he was playing a semi-hollow DGT private stock guitar, and he was kind of digging it. So It's an ongoing journey. But speaking of that cost of ownership, when you're buying a used guitar, part of this is knowing as much as you can about the service history of the guitar. I can make a little tweak to a truss rod, but you don't really want to own a guitar that I've done a lot of work on. And I don't really do a lot of work on guitars anymore. I'll do electronic stuff. I don't think Lyle, I don't know if Lyle would like my solder joints, but I have built some amplifiers under supervision of Dan Lurie at the FYD Amps back in the day. So I'll do the little bit of electronic works, but I'll tell you, it's also something where if I have somebody locally that I trust, I would rather have them do it and know that it's absolutely good, and not that, some solder joint that I did is going to break at some point. I always feel better when I can see that the guitar's been set up or tweaked by an experienced tech. And so if somebody tells me that they did all the work on their guitar and they're very excited by that, I'll have to admit that in general, I'm kind of hesitant to love that, as opposed to somebody goes, well, yeah, I live down the road from Austin Guitar Works and Austin Guitar House, and all the setup work is there. Or 30th Street Guitars, Matt did all the work on my guitars at 30th Street in New York. I'm going to feel good about all that. And I think you guys should too. Short of that, you should assume that buying the guitar probably is going to need at least the price of a professional setup the way you like it. And that's a cost. That's a real cost of collecting. All right. Like I said, I'm ripping through these. I'm halfway through my list. Let me see if we got any questions in the chat. Lyle says solder joints he sees in guitars are shocking. I assume he means both factory and aftermarket. I'm scrolling for comments. If you have comments, remember, put a question mark, unless you guys are just talking among yourselves, because I'm rambling on. Bill says, do you humidify your house to reduce humidity swings for your guitars? I live in locations that low humidity is a real issue. This is a tough one for me, Bill. Years ago, when I lived in Vermont and winter was a lot harder than it is here, I had a new house. It was very tight. And I had a better than average humidity system installed on the forced head air furnace and air conditioning. And I ran it kind of on the aggressive side, thinking of all the guitars I owned, because that was actually at the time in my life when I owned 36 electric guitars. It was at the end of my first marriage, and that's another whole video about the psychology of collecting, probably different video. Anyway, so I used to run it a little hot. And when it came time to sell the house, they actually found mold in places in the basement where there was little places where there was air getting in. And it was expensive to have that mold taken out of there. So I've always been a little gun shy since. I tend to keep my guitars in their cases now, not the electrics, but anything that's acoustic. And I pretty much have, I'm going to mention it actually, I have a Sunday routine where I go through and check everything. But I don't really push the envelope in the house anymore like I used to at one time. I'm sure there's people with systems that are better regulated than the one I had. And honestly, the problem in the end was that there were little places where air was getting in. And you're going to get condensation where you've got cold air hitting warm air in the building. So, all right. David Freebell says, how often should we what, David? Check the... David will get back, I'm sure. Luis says, have you gotten past the feeling of, I may need this guitar? Yeah. I would say that the best thing about that is that you generally can replace guitars. In my experience, I've never owned a guitar that I've said to myself, well, I could never get that back, or I could never get something back that would do that job. I've never had that. I don't think most of us play at the level where that last 5 or 10% is going to make a difference in the performance, or is going to make a difference in even our inspiration. I think that probably isn't the case. So yeah, I did get past that. George Shepard's disappointed that I only had 3 dozen. Sorry, George. Victor says, was I the only one who went guitar crazy buying during COVID? No, I think the whole world did. I think unique pieces. There's my segue to David Cassin's comment. Hopefully, hand-painted guitars will hold their value. David just did a hand-painted Telecaster with a Fender Custom Shop a couple of years ago. Beautiful thing. Had a skeleton head on the top, a skull and shoulder, I think it was. And then he just did a guitar with the guys at Novo. Yeah, a Solus, the single pickup. I think he's got a single P90. So you guys should go over there and check it out because it's this beautiful painting on this guitar. Looking for questions before I hit back to my list. Hey, Jake Stewart's here. Texas is well represented today. George Shepard said, do I oil my fingerboards? I do. I tend to oil the fingerboards when I do string changes. I've said it before, I have very dry hands and I don't have to change my strings very often. So I don't end up having to oil the fingerboards very often either. And I'll also add that I use trumpet valve oil on my fingerboards because I was in a shop once when the Yamaha rep came in and he was selling both trumpets and guitars to the local dealer. And he had the trumpet valve oil for like $3 and the guitar fingerboard oil was like $11. And he told me that the stuff in the containers was the exact same stuff. So I'm still working on that little container of valve oil back when I was taking trumpet lessons with my Miles Davis aspirations. Cross J says, hi, Keith, for yourself, when you so-called sentimental guitar that doesn't see much usage, but you feel like you can't sell it, do you still buckle up and move it along or keep it? If you go watch my video called When to Buy and When to Sell, I think it's in that video that I tell the story. I sold the first acoustic guitar I ever bought that I went halves with my father to buy when I was 14 years old. I of course, wanted an electric guitar, but it was a friend of a family member. The guitar was about 100 years old. It was a little parlor guitar. It was a copy of a 045, had mother pearl all over it. I never played it. And when a guy told me, somebody that I knew, when I was purging some stuff off, my local tech said he was looking for a couch/bedroom guitar. I sold it to him. I realized in the end that nothing was going to eliminate my memory of having been there, and it hasn't, of being there and talking to Mrs. Ely, who was 85 years old when I bought the guitar from her, and the guitar had belonged to her father. So she was selling a guitar that she had heard her own father play when she was a little girl. And then I bought the guitar with my father, and I remember it very clearly, like the debate about, was I going to kick in? I think we bought it for $160 and we each put in $80. And $80 was a ton of money for a 14-year-old Keith Williams, who had a paper route and, was picking apples, etc. So I have actually buckled down and sold those. That kind of goes along with everything can be replaced except your memories and the people that are in them. So I said, boy, I can get corny when it comes to the sentimental thing. So. You guys are racking up the questions here. All right. Perry says, if the collection went up in smoke and you had your insurance check, what's the first guitar you're buying? So I actually had an email from John Cordy today saying he's thinking about making a video called If I Had to Buy It All Over Again. And so I gave John my answer to that question because I think I'll probably make that video sometime too. It changes over time. And I've said here before that I wouldn't have all these guitars if I didn't do if I wasn't still doing the channel. What I would have if it was the absolute minimum, you have to wait for the video anyway. All right, so let me get back. It's 4:30. Let me do my TrueFire spot, and then we'll get back to the last three comments here. You guys had great things to say there. If you remember, I reached out to TrueFire to be my sponsor. They didn't reach out to me. And that's actually how I work with all companies. When companies reach out to me and they tell me they have something they want me to try or demo, even companies that I work with like Line 6 or Strandberg, if I don't have time to spend the time with the gear, I like to spend 2 or 3 months with a piece. I was never going to be, I'm not RJ, I'm not Sean Tubbs. I'm not these guys who can Like, I just don't have the breadth of experience with gear that they have, where they can find the unique tones in these boxes so fast. So when I'm working with a company, I have to kind of really love the company, or I'm never going to spend the time on their stuff. I have to be interested in what they're trying to do. Like, I have a couple of new Rev amps that I got from them because I reached out to them because they had some new things. And the D25 was actually an amp that was inspired by a video that I made 3 years ago with a little head and a tiny little cab from Mojo Tone. And so I always knew I wanted to follow up. And so I reached out to them. I did the same thing with TrueFire. And I can't say how happy, I'm just so happy that this ongoing relationship I've had with TrueFire has gone this long and has been worked out so well for us. They tell me that you guys are very responsive and keep signing up for lessons and buying all access passes to the extent that they treat me very well. And when I encourage other people like John Cordy to work with TrueFire and TrueFire to work with them, it often ends up working out really well too. They've got 45,000 lessons and libraries covering all different styles and levels. There's tab, notation, jam tracks. You can go to slow motion. They've got looping. They just keep upping the number of sort of different ways you can cut, slice, and dice this stuff. They've got Grammy-winning artists. They've got some of the top instructors in the world. My good friend Jeff McElwain is probably one of the top guitar teachers in the world. He's been doing this for 35 years. I think he's feeling a little old right now and coming back from NAMM. So he might not appreciate that particular characterization, but he is. He's one of the best. And, you know, you get to be the best with experience. Years ago, I decided to sign up for the All Access Pass because it let me take the variety of stuff. I like a lot of different kind of music. I'm spending a lot of time, really my life, as I said earlier, is sort of hovering around learning the intros to the live versions of Cliff to Dover. Some of those I've found on the internet. Some of those I'm watching Eric's hands. I don't find Eric to be a great explainer of how his genius brain works, but to have this film of him playing in such a very visible way is incredible. What a gift that he's decided and that TrueFire has facilitated for all of us. I set up my iPad on the music stand, and that's how I like to start my day. I don't always get to. I'm not always that balanced. I wish I was better and more disciplined about this. I was talking to David Barber. I probably play about 5 hours a week. And David said he's probably gets to play about 10. And that really feels like if this is what I am, then I should play more guitar. And the way I usually do that is by working through a TrueFire lesson. Remember that you can use the discount code 5watt35 to get 35% off courses. And if you use the link in the description, you'll be supporting the channel and you'll get world quality lessons at the same time. So, get out there and learn, practice, and play with TrueFire. Okay. All right. Let me go back to my list. We are halfway through. And frankly, the second half of the list is a little shorter. Actually, we're through the fourth one. Kind of. This is a segue. Number 4 is remember that you're buying the seller and that condition is really important, especially when you're dealing with an online purchase. I tend to be that annoying guy who always asks how heavy the guitar is. And I go from that. It's really important to get as much of the backstory as you can. I talked about it when I was talking about so who was it that serviced the guitar? Look at the background of the seller. Spend some time digging in and read the reviews of and see what their reputation is as a seller. I've jumped sometimes and grabbed a guitar and then it showed up and it wasn't packed well and it was kind of iffy or it got damaged. And then when I backtracked, I realized that the seller really hadn't been doing it that long. And I should have known better. And frankly, I could have helped them understand the best way to do that. Go get a guitar box from a local store or go have them, better yet, if you're not sure about packing a guitar, go have the local store ship it for you. Probably cheaper than going to UPS. So do your research before you jump. Condition is very important. Maybe not so much for you, but it will be for value in the long run. And it's funny, I have some PRSs again, and some brand collectors tend to be a lot more condition sensitive. That's the term I think of. They're condition sensitive. PRS collectors seem to be more about that pristine with the original tags than anybody else, for not a reason I understand. They are incredibly beautiful guitars, and they certainly work as just works of art, separate from actually even strumming them. So maybe that's where it's coming from. But often I find these guys just have them in their cases. But having mentioned that, hang tags are a really nice way to know what that guitar started out as. I've actually gotten guitars and they said that they had the hang tags and for a PRS, and then the hang tag wasn't for that guitar at all. They didn't bother to check to see if that serial number was the one that matched the tape on the case that they had when they brought it in. So you want to be really clear. The dents and scratches might not matter to you so much, but they might matter to the next buyer. So when it comes time for you to sell the guitar because you've moved on. This one is pretty interesting. And it was really hard for me to believe. When I started playing jazz gigs, I absolutely felt that I needed to have the right kind of guitar to get those tones. But also, to be honest, I thought that you needed to look a certain way if you were going to be out playing that kind of music. And number 5 is nobody cares about your guitar. They don't. You're going to get into collecting guitars and you start spending lots of time on websites, researching guitars. It's easy to start thinking that other people care as much as you start caring about what you're playing, or even that they care about what you have. I'll have people who write to me in the comments and they'll tell me what they have. And I'm always fascinated by, they're trying to connect, I think, with the script. They're trying to connect with my interest in the script. And I get that, but we aren't what we own. We are what we do. So I can tell you that audiences really don't care what you're playing. I switched from that Diakisto to the Parker. And even gigs where there was a room full of musicians, we regularly got hired to play the local symphony's fundraiser every year. We knew people and they liked having a different kind of music. And the interesting thing is kind of twofold. I'll digress a little bit here. It wouldn't be 5 Watt World if I didn't. I was playing my Parker on that gig. And of course, none of those folks had a preconceived idea about what kind of guitar I should be playing. And I'm going to show a better picture of that guitar in a second here. But the other part of it was because they could play the music that they played so well from memory often, they thought what I was doing was something I could do and hold a conversation. So in the middle of a solo, one of these players that I would know from the symphony, the cellist or the second violin or somebody, they would walk up into the band and start talking to me, to catch up. And I'm in the middle of a tune and I'm not good enough to do that. I don't know. I'm sure there's people here that are. I'm not that guy. I never was. I probably never will be. But they certainly did not care what I was playing. This is a picture of me with Gene Cothran, who was the keyboard player in that band, and Gene saved me every week. And that's my emerald green 1996 Parker Fly Deluxe. Guitar weighed 5 pounds, had a very thin neck. And I will tell you that I could play things on that guitar I couldn't play on any other at that time. But I played that Parker on a straight ahead jazz gig, and not once, I mean, not once in a weekly gig for 5 years did anyone come up and comment on how unusual a guitar that was to play. Even guitar players that I knew in town who played 335s or 175s, straight up jazz guitars, they didn't come and go, I can't believe you're using that on this gig. They just didn't. People don't care what you have. There's a thing called the spotlight. And we assume that the spotlight in the world is on us. And in fact, the spotlight, if you understand this, you've heard this concept before, the spotlight really is that the spotlight's on everybody. We all think that we're in our own spotlight and we're not really looking into the other spotlights. We're all worried about how we're being perceived. And in the end, it really doesn't, most people just don't care anything about guitars. In this social media driven age that we live in, I think we get sucked into buying things that we think will impress people that we don't even know. People that are on a forum or people that we might bump into in a store. And I know enough about guitars to be impressed by somebody if they have something that's really cool. But what I really want is to get together with them and play and hear that guitar, or get to play it myself. Whether it's vintage or incredibly, rare guitars, that's kind of where I try to get to. I can be sucked in by this like anybody else. I said, there's nothing on this list that doesn't describe part of my life. So this is just something I read, and really that I've experienced. This can be a deadly thing, of buying stuff that's trying to prove something that you can't really buy. I had a time, let me go, where's that slide? Oh, here you go. So I had a time when I really dove into Strandbergs, and I actually still own two of those guitars. The blue one is the only one that's gone. I actually know where that guitar is. I hear from the guy every once in a while because it started life as a second. You can see it has a really nice dark fingerboard on it. That's Pau Ferro, but it has a really nice dark fingerboard. It's a great guitar. People often ask me, and I put this slide up for a reason, because people often ask me to outline what it is that I'm playing right now. And one of the reasons I don't is that I don't want to influence somebody else's journey around what they're collecting. I'm glad to share my experience with something that I found to be cool, and I do that here on the channel. I can make this bigger. There, that's better. And I do that here, of course. But I really hope that that I'm not holding up a guitar that doesn't change somebody else's goals around what they need for themselves. I've said here recently that I'm not sure how many guitars I'd have if I wasn't making videos. I mentioned this today already, but what I use guitars for has a lot to do with the day job of running the channel. Just because I like a guitar doesn't mean has anything to do with you or your playing or whether you'd like the guitar. When people write to me and they ask me what amp should I recommend for their home, it usually involves a lot of back and forth. And I'll tell you that probably 8 times out of 10, I get on a phone call with them because it's just too much ground to cover quickly, to do it quickly and figure out what it is that they're looking for. And then I'll do my best to help. But I have my favorites. I was actually on with Otto earlier today, Otto von Fledermaus, and we were talking about small amps and the ones that I recommend. And I happen to know from his videos that Lyle is not a big fan of the current made in Vietnam Vox AC10C1. I know that the first generation had some problems, but I think even way back when he made that video, I commented that I really liked those amps. They don't sound like Voxes, but they're really flexible. My opinion, they're really flexible and they have a master volume and they sound really good at living room volumes. And I think they're very flexible. So like I said, I was sharing that with Otto, but I also encouraged them to get other opinions and get out there and talk to people who, like Lyle, who know more about what's inside and how they might hold up over time. So at the end of the day, you got to decide what's best for you. It might work for you to play what I played, but more likely it probably doesn't. All right, number 6. Collecting is a marathon, not a sprint. It's very common to dive in and over-acquire, to try to check all the imagined boxes as quickly as possible. It's easy to get caught up in collecting and having rather than playing and enjoying the instruments. I've said it here before. It is much easier to feel like you're making progress by buying instruments than it is to spend the hour trying to work out those chord shapes from that piece of music that you're working on. When I was in college, I played in an acoustic duo, singing and playing with a friend of mine, Dick Detweiler, and we had a great time. We did it for years. At the time I owned a really nice old 1915 Gibson mandolin. I had a custom built banjo that I still own, though my nephew has it. Don't ask me to play banjo. You won't get that from me. I had a 12-string Martin with a slot headstock, and it was 12 soft shoulders, and it was 12 frets to the body. And I had a really great Guild D40 that David Stutzman at Stutzman's Music in Rochester had scalloped the frets on. I mean, the scallop with braces on, not the frets. No, it's not a Shakti guitar. Scalloped the braces on and lightened the top. It was an amazing guitar. On Sunday afternoons, I would get each of the instruments out and I would check their humidity, insert. I would polish their guitar. I polished the instrument. I can still remember, because they don't make it this way anymore, the unique smell of Martin polish that they sold in the 70s and 80s. It wasn't in a aerosolized container. It was like a little spritz bottle. And I would spray that on the guitars and I would polish and the mandolin and stuff. And I would polish the instruments. I'd tune them and I would spend some time playing each one of them every Sunday. That was how I spent Sundays during much of my college years. And for a long time, I thought that would be a great limit to my instrument collection, to have the number of instruments that I could get through on a typical Sunday afternoon, playing and trying to keep my chops up on mandolin or those kinds of things. And of course, that went by the wayside as soon as I could afford to own more instruments than that. But I always think back to that time because I didn't have a lot of money, because I didn't have a lot of money, I had to buy instruments very slowly and over a period of time. I spent a lot of time thinking about what it was that I was going to have and what it was I was going to use. I think one of the really great things to do when you're thinking about your collecting is think about the frequency of how often you're going to end up deciding to buy an instrument. I know guys that have, I think I'm jumping ahead. I am. I'm like off script, boys and girls. I get it, that we fall in love with consumerism. I get it that we want to acquire stuff. We get addicted to the hunt. We often end up spending time shopping for guitars. And we do that even sometimes, like there was a time in my life that I probably spent more time shopping for guitars than I was doing playing guitars. The best collections I've seen have been built over a very long period of time, where they have a story attached to each instrument and why they're being used. And people that own those collections can talk about how their tastes have evolved and why they have what they have now. The third video I ever made was this video. How many guitars do you need? I actually made the video because I thought of some certain players that I had always really respected who tended to play one type of guitar. And in that video, I think it's that video, I cite something that I'd read in an old hunting book that in my experience applies to guitar collections. And that is, beware the man with one gun, for surely he'll know how to use it. I'm not saying that everyone can do all they want to do with guitar playing with one guitar, but I've always contended that most of us don't have enough time to play a variety of different kinds of guitars well. I think that by narrowing it down, by buying slowly over time, it's likely that we'll build a collection of instruments that we hopefully know how to use, like that old, proverb. So embrace the idea that this is a long-term thing, something that you love doing. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And I think you'll be happier along the way. And hopefully you'll end up with a collection that you're more attached to. Okay, this is where I do the disclaimer again. I don't want to imply here that there's a specific set of rules that should govern everyone's collecting. I just think that's always a good thing to take a step back and think about what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it. Particularly when it's something that can cost hundreds or even thousands of dollars. I've come to the point for me where I tend to measure the cost of everything that I think about buying in time, in either time or in experiences that I could buy with that money. So in other words, this goes back to Thoreau, and since I was reading Cal Newport's book, Digital Minimalism, which is really pretty dated at this point, but he talks about Thoreau's sense of economics, which is really what he was interested in Walden. And he talks about how money is not worth what you can buy with it. Money really should be thought of, or things should be thought of, as how much of your life you have to give up to generate the money to buy that thing. So if I wasn't working to buy this thing that I think I need, then what could I have done with that time? Or I also kind of think of, for the price of this guitar, could I have spent a week in Paris? I said this in a video a long time ago, and somebody put in the comments, dude, I've been to Paris, buy the guitar. To which I responded, that guy must have a different relationship to bread than I have, because I really enjoy Paris for that reason, if not all the other reasons. Which is, just to remind us that everyone's definitions of what's enough are different and that they change over time. And that's absolutely cool. Mine changes over time. I'll gather things up for video work, and then periodically I'll purge. I'm actually going to take gear over to Ish tomorrow to sell some things. And so I just think that if I've left off a rule that you've found works for you, or a structure that works for you, I'd like you to leave it in the comments. And I'm always learning from all of you. It's the reason 5 Watt is a world. Like I said, it's not Keith's place on purpose. And that's one of my favorite things about the channel. Okay, therein endeth the rant. Let's see if we got any more questions. A man with one gun. Yeah, Willie Nelson, exactly. Some people just arriving. Typical Keith. Anyway, use this stuff in the description. Use the links there for TrueFire. Let them know that you love the 5 Watt world and you got there from me. And thanks for everybody. Until next time, thanks for being a part of the 5 Watt world. And here's John. Whoa, back. Smooth.